Jamal Carter, a 22-year-old black college student, is walking home from his part-time job when police officers pull up beside him. They accuse him of fitting the description of a robbery suspect. Despite his protests and the fact that he has an alibi, the officers arrest him, pinning him to the ground with unnecessary force. The moment is captured on a bystander's phone, but the police seize the footage before it can be posted. Jamal is taken to the station, where he is aggressively interrogated. He repeatedly insists on his innocence, but the officers manipulate his words and refuse to let him contact a lawyer for hours. Eventually, he is charged with armed robbery and attempted murder, crimes he didn't commit. His mother, Angela Carter, is devastated and hires a defense attorney, Malcolm Ross, who immediately sees the holes in the case. The only evidence against Jamal is a grainy security camera image and the testimony of a white store clerk who hesitated before identifying him. As the trial begins, the prosecution, backed by the police, paints Jamal as a dangerous criminal. The jury, mostly white, is influenced by the media portraying him as a thug. Malcolm fights hard, presenting clear evidence that Jamal was at work at the time of the crime. But the judge, known for his bias against black defendants, dismisses key evidence and overrules objections from the defense. Despite the weak case, the jury convicts Jamal. Angela collapses in tears as her son is led away in handcuffs, sentenced to 20 years in prison. Protests break out across the city, but the system remains unmoved. Months later, new evidence surfaces proving Jamal's innocence. A journalist uncovers police misconduct, revealing that officers hid key footage that could have exonerated him. As Malcolm prepares to appeal the case, Jamal is mysteriously killed in prison, officially labeled as an accident. The truth is clear: he was silenced to prevent a scandal. Jamal's death ignites a nationwide movement against racial injustice, forcing people to confront the reality of a system designed to criminalize black lives. But for Angela, no amount of justice will bring back her son. Jamal Carter, a 22-year-old black college student, is walking home from his part-time job when police officers suddenly pull up and arrest him. Confused and scared, he repeatedly asks why he's being detained, but the officers ignore his pleas. He is accused of robbing a convenience store and shooting the clerk, charges that make no sense to him. Despite his protests, he is thrown into the back of the police car. At the station, the interrogation turns aggressive. The officers, led by Detective Ryan Calloway, refuse to let Jamal contact a lawyer for hours. They insist they have evidence against him, even though he knows he was at work at the time of the crime. When he refuses to confess, they become more hostile, threatening him with life in prison unless he cooperates. Meanwhile, Angela Carter, Jamal's mother, desperately searches for legal help. She finds Malcolm Ross, a dedicated civil rights attorney, who takes on the case. As Malcolm begins investigating, he discovers the police are manipulating evidence to frame Jamal. The most damning piece of evidence is a grainy surveillance photo from the convenience store. The person in the image barely resembles Jamal, but Detective Calloway insists it's him. Malcolm requests access to the full video footage, but the police claim the original files were accidentally deleted. Even worse, the prosecution relies on a witness statement from the store clerk, a white man named Henry Lawson. Initially, Lawson told police he wasn't sure if Jamal was the man who robbed him. However, after a private meeting with detectives, Lawson changes his story, now certain Jamal was the attacker. Malcolm suspects coercion, but the judge refuses to allow cross-examination on this point. In court, the prosecution paints Jamal as a violent thug. They bring up minor disciplinary incidents from high school, twisting them to fit their narrative. The mostly white jury listens intently, clearly influenced by the prosecution's portrayal of Jamal. When Malcolm presents a time-stamped work schedule proving Jamal was at work during the crime, the judge dismisses it as insufficient to prove his innocence. The defense calls a key witness, Jamal's co-worker, who was with him during the time of the robbery, but before she can testify, she receives an anonymous threat warning her to stay out of it. Out of fear, she refuses to testify. Despite the weak case, the jury finds Jamal guilty. Angela collapses in the courtroom as her son is sentenced to 20 years in prison. Protesters outside chant for justice, but the system remains unmoved. Weeks later, Malcolm receives an anonymous tip. A police officer confesses that evidence was tampered with to ensure Jamal's conviction. Before Malcolm can act, tragic news arrives. Jamal has been killed in prison. Officials call it an accident, but everyone knows the truth. Jamal's death sparks nationwide protests, exposing the corruption in the justice system. But for Angela, the fight for justice comes too late. Her son is gone, another victim of a system built to destroy black lives. Jamal Carter, a 22-year-old black college student, is falsely accused of robbing a convenience store and shooting the clerk. Despite his airtight alibi, he was at work during the crime. The police manipulate evidence, forcing witnesses to change their statements. The system is rigged against him, and his mother, Angela Carter, is desperate to save her son. She hires Malcolm Ross, a civil rights attorney known for taking on cases of racial injustice. Malcolm quickly realizes the case against Jamal is built on lies. Surveillance footage is missing, the key witness changed his statement after meeting with police, and Jamal's work records proving his innocence are ignored. Determined to expose the corruption, Malcolm prepares for an intense legal battle. As Malcolm digs deeper, he starts receiving anonymous threats. At first, they seem harmless, a few hateful messages and calls warning him to drop the case. But soon, the intimidation escalates. His office is vandalized, his car tires are slashed, and an unmarked vehicle follows him home at night. He files police reports, but nothing is done. Despite the danger, Malcolm refuses to back down. In court, he aggressively challenges the prosecution, exposing inconsistencies in their evidence. He confronts the store clerk, Henry Lawson, about his changed testimony, but the judge quickly shuts him down. When Malcolm demands access to the missing surveillance footage, the prosecution claims it was accidentally erased. As the trial nears its end, Malcolm receives the most chilling warning yet. An anonymous caller tells him, "If you want to see your family again, stop." That night, his house is broken into. Papers are scattered, his laptop is stolen, and a single bullet is left on his desk. Angela begs him to step away, fearing for his life. But Malcolm knows if he quits, Jamal has no chance. Despite his efforts, the jury convicts Jamal, sentencing him to 20 years. Malcolm vows to appeal, but before he can file, tragedy strikes. Jamal is found dead in his prison cell. The official report calls it a suicide, but Malcolm and Angela know the truth. Fueled by grief and rage, Malcolm dedicates himself to exposing the corruption behind Jamal's case. His fight for justice is far from over. Jamal Carter, a 22-year-old black college student, is sentenced to 20 years in prison for a robbery and shooting he didn't commit. Despite clear evidence of his innocence, the racist judicial system convicts him based on manipulated evidence and coerced witness testimonies. His mother, Angela Carter, and his lawyer, Malcolm Ross, refuse to give up. Across town, investigative journalist Maya Reynolds watches the case unfold. A veteran reporter with a reputation for exposing police corruption, Maya senses something is wrong. The missing surveillance footage, the shifting witness statements, and the police department's history of racial profiling all raise red flags. Determined to uncover the truth, she starts digging. Maya reaches out to Henry Lawson, the store clerk who testified against Jamal. Off the record, Lawson admits he was pressured by the police to identify Jamal as the suspect. He initially resisted, but after hours of interrogation and subtle threats about his immigration status, he gave in. Afraid for his safety, Lawson refuses to go public. Next, Maya tracks down an anonymous source within the police department. The officer, speaking under the condition of anonymity, confirms that detectives tampered with evidence, discarding security footage that could have exonerated Jamal. The real suspect, a known criminal informant, was let go to protect police interests. As Maya prepares to publish her findings, she starts receiving threats. Her car is broken into, her emails are hacked, and she's warned to stop digging. But the more they try to silence her, the more determined she becomes. With Malcolm Ross's help, Maya secures a leaked internal memo proving that the police deliberately suppressed evidence. The story explodes, making national headlines. Public outrage erupts, protests fill the streets, and calls for justice grow louder. But before an appeal can be filed, tragedy strikes. Jamal is found dead in his prison cell. Authorities call it a suicide. Jamal Carter, a 22-year-old black college student, is falsely convicted of robbery and attempted murder. Despite his alibi and a lack of solid evidence, a biased judge and corrupt police ensure his conviction. Sentenced to 20 years, he is locked away, another victim of a broken system, but his mother, Angela Carter, refuses to give up. Alongside civil rights attorney Malcolm Ross and investigative journalist Maya Reynolds, she fights to expose the truth. Maya uncovers missing surveillance footage proving Jamal was at work during the crime. A police whistleblower confirms that evidence was tampered with, and a key witness admits to being coerced into testifying against Jamal. With overwhelming new evidence, Malcolm files for an appeal. The case gains national attention, and protests erupt demanding Jamal's release. The pressure forces the court to schedule a hearing that could overturn his conviction. It seems justice is finally within reach, but the police won't let their lie unravel so easily. 2 days before the hearing, Jamal is found dead in his prison cell, shot twice, execution style. Officials claim it was a gang-related attack, but Malcolm and Maya know the truth. Jamal was murdered to protect the system that framed him. News of his death spreads like wildfire. Outrage turns into action as thousands take to the streets, chanting his name. Cities across the country erupt in protests, demanding accountability for Jamal's murder. Police respond with tear gas and rubber bullets, escalating tensions. The government is forced to launch a federal investigation. Maya publishes her full exposé, revealing the deep-rooted corruption behind Jamal's case. The officer who framed him is exposed, the judge is forced to resign, and multiple officials face criminal charges. But for Angela, it's too late. Her son is gone. Jamal Carter becomes a symbol of a broken system and a rallying cry for justice. His name is painted on murals, his story is told in documentaries, and his mother, though heartbroken, leads the fight to reform a system that destroyed her son. Justice was stolen from Jamal, but his death sparks a movement too powerful to ignore.